When I Zoom, when you're recording it. Oh, you've already started recording.
Yes. Here, I'll just put it down there. What's that? What if you hit?
What if I do it here? Is that gonna work? Nope.
There we go.
Oh, you're gonna use this?
No, you can use your clicker now.
Can't. Okay. Sounds good. I'm sure G guy around here. That's a blessing. All right. Okay. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Packed up my bags when I was 5 and moved to Colorado.
Mary Jo's from the here. And you moved to Grand Junction.
When I was 5. Okay. Packed up my bags, moved to Grand Junction. Took my parents with me.
And you're gonna be amped, right?
Right there. It's a microphone right there.
Nice. Look at that. Is it on right now?
Yes, it is. It's actually recording right now. Actually. Good.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have better start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave. All right, welcome everybody. How's that sound? Does it sound good? You guys can hear it. It's not too, doesn't ring too much. All right, did you test it, Dave, for your for the sound for you? It was good. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome tonight. Thank you for coming. My name is Pastor Parnell Mahoney with Maranatha Christian Church and Maranatha Christian Fellowship and International Student Outreach, who have sponsored this event. And you have come to Epic Fail, Was Darwin Wrong? And tonight's presentation is Blind Chance or Grand Design. And I just want to talk about our table over here. We have a sign-up sheet. If you're interested in our ministry, please sign up. If you're looking for some information, check out the table. We have 2 more events this week on this subject that are different topics. If you didn't know that, you can grab a flyer on the table before you leave if you're interested. And I'll be kind of covering those other topics at the end of the presentation, just as a review. So we're excited about our speakers tonight. Dave and Mary Jo Nutting are from Alpha Omega Institute. They're the founders and directors. And they have been teaching creation science for 40 years. And Dave is from Milwaukee. You might have heard me talking to him on the microphone. He's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado. And Mary Jo is from Mankato, so she's Minnesota born. So I'm actually from California, but glad you're from Minnesota, Mary Jo. And They are former evolutionists who carefully studied the scientific evidence and became creationists. They have both taught at the high school and college level, and both have taught evolution at times. And they have advanced degrees in mathematics and geology for Dave, and biology with a science education emphasis for Mary Jo. So we're excited to hear from them tonight. Dave and Mary Jo both enjoy hiking. Dave is an avid fly fisherman. Mary Jo loves to, she enjoys her grandkids. And yeah, we've been bringing them in as a ministry for a long time, probably 15 to 20 years yearly. Last year was the first time they weren't on campus. We missed them last year on campus, but we're excited that things are opening up again. Hope you don't mind my mask being down. It's just easier for me to communicate and breathe up here. So hopefully you're far enough away, you can handle it. But a little bit of about our group real quick. We do have a weekly Bible study. We call it the Dinner Bible Fellowship. Some of the people here are part of that weekly gathering. And so if you're interested in something like that, please talk to me. I have cards on the table. My name's Parnell again, so you can grab a card and reach out to me or sign up, indicate your interest. We have worship meetings on campus on Saturday nights and lots of other exciting things. So my personal story on this subject is I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and but I heard the gospel from someone on campus here at the University of Minnesota. I'm actually 43. I don't know if I look like it, but when I was 19 years old, I started meeting with a pastor, and he started introducing me to Jesus Christ, started studying the Bible. I was done with partying. I was ready to hear something more real. And I thought, okay, we'll give this gospel a chance. And I heard it for the first time. It gave me hope, but I didn't know if it was real. Wondered if this was God, if this was true. Met Jesus Christ in my apartment one night. I didn't see him, but I met him. He was there. And I gave my life to him, and my life changed forever when I was 19. And after that, I did a paradigm shift. And I thought, well, if through reading the Bible, I believed, and all of a sudden I encountered God in Jesus Christ, and he came into my life, then I'm just going to believe the whole Bible now. So I went back to Genesis, started reading, and I thought, okay, I don't know about this. I believe in evolution, and was challenged a little bit by it, and thought, how do I make these things fit? And but I just started thinking to myself, well, all right, God, you said you created the world in 6 days. So where's the evidence outside of the Bible, which is historic record? But where's the scientific evidence to support that? And it wasn't too long before I started meeting people like Dave and Mary Jo Nutting, and I was really excited to hear what they had to share. So excited that we've been bringing them in for years and years. So we as Christians believe the Bible is revealed history. It tells us how the universe got here, how the world was formed, how we got here. And as Christians, our faith rests on historic facts, or we have no faith at all. So if we're just believing in a legend, really, we have no faith. Christianity hinges on the fact that it has to be historic. It really happened. So in 1 Corinthians 15, part of that verse, verse 17, it says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. So if we don't have a real Savior who is a real person, a real man on the earth who really died for sins, really rose from the dead historically, well, I might as well go back to the bar. So it is a historic faith that we have. Otherwise, we have no faith at all. So the Bible record tells us about creation. Some of you may know this. Sorry if it's redundant to you. Some of you may not. It tells us that how God, in a special event, created everything. It tells us how man and woman fell from God's grace into sin, into rebellion. It talks about how God flooded the whole world in judgment because man was in rebellion. It talks about how God came in the form of a man, Jesus Christ, how he taught us the way to God, how he lived a sinless life, died on a Roman cross to pay for our sins as a substitutionary sacrifice, a holy payment, righteous payment to give us salvation if we trust in him. It talks about how he raised from the dead, and we can have a relationship with God and have eternal life. So as a Christian, why this subject? Well, it's the first book of the Bible that talks about creation. So if God can't get the first book right, how can we trust him for the rest? Right. And so how can we really believe that we're really saved, or the salvation's a real thing if this isn't real? So this is a passionate subject for us. This presentation tonight will be about an hour and 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A after that. So if you have questions, save them for then. We're excited to hear what questions you have. And without further ado, please welcome Dave Nutty.
Hey. Well, I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna have to, I don't want to pass out up here, really. All right, so we're talking about grand design, blind chance. I won't say I claim Milwaukee, Wisconsin, okay? I packed my bags when I was 5 years old and moved to Colorado from Milwaukee. I took my parents with me, but yeah, anyhow, we have a free newsletter, Think and Believe, so you can go online and you can sign up for that, okay? Go to discovercreation.org. You'll see a place where you can actually get a email copy of that. So a lot of people think that creation is just a religious myth. Parnell just mentioned that, whereas evolution is science. You've heard that before? Yeah, over and over again. Now, what I'm going to have to say right now is going to be a little shocking. It's going to be almost heretical. I'm going to say evolution is not science. Whoa. No, it's actually a philosophy, but I think it's posing as though it were science. It is actually part of naturalism. The idea of naturalism is a worldview that everything in the world can be explained. All phenomena, etc., life itself, the universe itself can be explained by only naturalistic processes. That means no God processes, okay? And so that's naturalism. Everything must and will and could be explained by naturalism. I think that isn't quite true. Okay, first of all, naturalism. How do you get a universe? Okay, here's Discover magazine. Here's a quote on the bottom of the front cover of that magazine. The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero, nada. And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from where? Absolutely nowhere, okay? How is that possible? Isn't that a good question to ask? And then they go in, gives you some kind of a naturalistic explanation, and it's a speculation is what it is, but it's presented as if, oh, this could be fact, but it is a speculation, okay? Anyhow, think about it. How could nothing explode? Is that a problem? I think so. I think it's a big problem, okay? But now, when I say naturalism, can't we just see evolution in action? Don't we see it around us all the time, right? If we're taught that very frequently, but I don't think so. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about some of the best supposed evidences of evolution. We're going to show you how you can get variation, how you can explain all the different skin colors from white as white to black as black in one generation. One generation. Mary Jo is going to show you a photo of twins. One showing the very much African type features. The other one looks like they're from Norway or Sweden anyhow. You see a very different, but those are twins from medium skin colored parents. And so we're going to show you how that works. And we're going to show you many other evidences for evolution. And we'll listen to the biologist there about, was Darwin wrong? So-called proofs of evolution fail. And that's tomorrow night, same station, same time, right here, right? Okay. Anyhow, so you want to do that. If you think of some of the best evidences for evolution, we would hope as well that you bring in some of what you consider very good evidences for evolution. And after the initial presentation, that'd be great to hear some of the things that you're currently thinking about. And we'll be glad to either answer them or say, hey, wow, that looks like something to study. All right. Tonight, we'll be sharing stuff. In the next couple of nights, we'll be sharing material. And we're going to give you definitely our opinion. All right. And everybody's entitled to an opinion, I'm sure. But But that's from us. But when we share material, I'm hoping what will happen is you don't just believe it because we say it. Go out, test it out, do your own research and see what happens when you do that. And that's what happened to both Mary Jo and I. We ended up doing research on the subject of origins. We used to be strong believers in evolution. And then we started studying scientific evidence and realized some of the things we had been taught just didn't hold up. Okay. And so we want to give you some of those ideas tonight and the next couple of nights. Okay. That's fair enough. We're going to be looking at this. Were things created with a design, or was this all happened by accident? Is this claim true? You can't tell if something was designed. Perhaps mutations coupled with natural selections might make it look designed. How many have heard that from somebody in your total education experience? Okay, we're hearing a few people hear that, right? May look designed. So we can't tell if something was designed. I beg to differ. There are things you can tell that are designed. For instance, look at that painting. How many would say that that painting came as a result of an explosion in a paint factory? No takers. Okay, no takers. Oil and canvas do not line up that way, do they? Naturally, there is order imposed on that thing called a painting. And I know it was designed. I know there was an artist because I watched my mother paint that thing. Okay, she was a very good artist, although all her life says, oh, I can't paint. Yeah, she never realized it. And basically, look at one-celled creatures. Look at the design there, color enhanced, of course, okay, in the radial area. When you look at that, you say, that looks like pretty intricate design. Okay, so things are designed too. And I'm going to have to stop and say one thing. Every one of you were designed as well. Okay. In fact, it's because of our designer and designing you, designing the human race, that basically gives you any worth whatsoever. We're going to be talking about that in the question, answer, etc. But that's what it is. It's because you are a product of God's design. Okay, I say you can see design. Let's look at a couple of things. You know, the spider web, the silk of a single strand is 5 times stronger than steel. Isn't that neat? If you made a web across the sky, and let's say we used 1/4 inch diameter spider web for the cord of that web, it would stop a Boeing 747 in mid-flight. That's how strong that is, okay? And stretchy as well. All right, and that's because that one single strand is not a single strand, even though it looks like it. It is a woven multiple strand apparatus. And when you look with the electron scanning microscope, and then add a little color to show what's going on there, you find out the spinneret is an actual weaving factory. So this is the backside of a spider. Whoever thought that that spider was weaving those strands together? When you get 5 little strands making up what looks like one single strand of spider silk, now it's extremely strong. That's why it can be stronger than steel for the same diameter. All right, now we look at things in nature, and I say, is it realistic to think those things happened by mutations and then natural selection, survival of the fittest? Is that what produced these things? That's the question we want to look at for a while today. Think about a shark. Do you realize sharks are amazing swimming creatures? They can actually sneak up on something in the water, and without noise, they can actually glide underwater frequently. It's because of the scales of a shark that allows it to go through that water. It cuts any of the drag, etc., that a swimmer would have. Well, people started studying that shark skin, looking at it under great magnification. And sure enough, those little tiny things, we always thought it was a sleek skin of the shark, but it isn't. It isn't. They are little tiny scales with those particular flutes in it, let's call it. And what that does is it is a specific way of cutting down the drag of the water. So scientists have been studying it. Now that means that the manufacturers started getting in the act. All right, they found out if they make their swimsuits based upon the shark's technology, get that technology, they could get a better swimsuit. In the Olympics, 83% of the medal winners wore shark skin swimsuits. By 2007, half of the world's swimming records have been broken by competitors with shark skin swimsuits. And they were about ready to, in fact, I don't know, make them illegal because it gave people too big of an advantage, all right, in swimming. All right, now shipbuilders got in the act. Now they couldn't emulate the scale of a shark, but they tried this particular design right here. And one of the things they did find with that particular design was the barnacles didn't grow on it. And so you didn't have to take the ship out of the water and scrape off the barnacles every year. Barnacles really slow down ships in the sea. But then they also found out they could save several 100,000 gallons of diesel fuel per year, per ship. So this is a rough, it's just rough of what God's design is, but that's what they have. Okay, National Geographic says that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Did you ever hear that before? Well, there's a big problem with that. Number one, several of the pictures they had in National Geographic turned out to be forgeries. All of their key players were forgeries. One was reconstructed from 5 different fossils and put together. They were able to prove it. They made retractions eventually, okay? But bird's amazing wing. Think about this next thing. How do you go from a reptile to a bird? Walking gait of a reptile. Very different from the flying gait of a bird, okay? Now, if a reptile is going to turn into a bird, you've got to change that whole mechanism. You have to have a new bone, all right? So you get a new bone. Let's just expand that a little bit so you can see it, called the keel. Here it is right there. Oh, wait a minute. Now we have to have something brand new here too. Another bone with a hole in it. Why do we need a hole? Well, the muscles have to migrate from up here down to here. They have to migrate. How do they do that? I wonder. All right. And not only that, but you still now they're down here. How do you lift the wing up? How do you lift the wing up? Well, it turns out you have to have a pulley system. The tendon of the muscle passes through a hole in the end of the bone right here, goes around this particular, call it fulcrum, the scapula. It goes around there, attaches up here in the wing, puts a little tension on that muscle, the wing comes up. All right. And that means even let's say a trumpeter swan, the big, beautiful swan, guess what? 8-foot wingspan. And that pulley system works beautifully. All right. But how do you get it from a walking gait? It's very hard. And by the way, that trumpeter swan can use this mechanism and fly 60 miles per hour real easily. Great big bird. All right. That's an amazing wing pulley system. I would say, this is my viewpoint, it is reasonable and rational to conclude it was designed. Why? It's not just, oh, it looks designed. What is it? It is actually, you see design by looking at engineered type structures. That engineered systems, an engineer can tell, oh, somebody designed that, okay? And now did millions of years of slow and gradual mutations coupled with natural selection produce it? I don't believe so. Think about the bird bone design. Listen to what they described it as in one particular magazine. It said, here's a bird bone. It's lightweight. thin-walled, reinforced tubular structure for maximum strength. Wait a minute, that sounds like an advertisement for an engineering magazine or something, or an engineering invention, correct? Yeah, that's what it sounds like. But it's also part of the respiratory, the air, the lung system. It's part of it right there. It performs some of the storage sacs for a very special design of the bird lung, okay? Now, I want you to take a deep breath and hold it, kind of like you're doing anyhow in our mass society. Let's hold it. I can't do that very long. I'm not going to demonstrate, okay? But take a deep breath and hold it. Now, on top of that deep breath, I want you to take another deep breath and hold it. Now do that a third time and a fourth time. I can't go that far. You've got it good. You'd make a good underwater swimmer. All right. But it doesn't work. You're going to be gasping pretty soon, aren't you? Maybe me with just after once. But anyhow, so you've got this particular system you just demonstrated. The air comes in one tube and the byproduct, or the you might say the waste, goes out the same tube. It's called a dead end system. That's what it is, a dead end system. Every reptile and every vertebrate has that system, except for birds. And keep in mind, we are told that the bird evolved from the reptiles, right? From the dinosaurs. But it's a totally different type of lung. And they were able to demonstrate that with some of these things that were found. Okay, so the lungs of the bird is different. It doesn't go in and out the same little spot. It goes as a continuous hose system through there. Goes from here, goes through the lung system. There's the oxygen transfer and goes back around and comes back in a different way. Now, how come they need a different system? Because flight is so much oxygen dependent, not just for the air, but for the breathing. You need so much extra oxygen going through. Okay, so how do you get from a reptile or other vertebrate, a dead end system, to a continuous flow system without shutting down everything and starting all over again? How are you going to do that? By a slow and gradual processes. You understand what is the selective advantage for a transitional form in order to do that? What you're going to kill off a whole bunch of reptiles trying to evolve this thing, aren't you? Yeah, it's a dead end for reptiles right there if you're trying to evolve into birds. So that particular system right there is, according to Michael Denton, who wrote a book clear back in 1985 called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, in which he presented several different potential things that he thought evolution is going to have a hard time explaining. And this is one of them right here. Now, we thought, when we read that book, we thought Michael Denton must have been a creationist. But no, he said, I'm not a creationist, I'm an evolutionist. Okay. Since that time, he's now endorsed the intelligent design movement. Okay. But he mentioned that as a problem. And sure enough, it's a major problem for evolution. No selective advantage for some of these transitional forms. How do you go from a leg to the wing with a totally different system? What's the selective advantage for the half leg, half wing? Do you understand? It's not going to run very fast and it's not going to fly. Okay. And so it's, you might say, dead meat. It's not going to work. All right. There's a whole bunch of problems with that whole idea that birds evolved from reptiles. For instance, birds have a streamlined body balance for flight. Reptiles don't. Birds have light, hollow bones, which is also part of the lung system. That's the storage part. That's very important too. Birds have powerful flight muscles. Very different from what you see in reptiles. Feathers of a bird originate from follicles inside the skin. I guess that. Wait a minute, scales are merely folds of the skin. They have a different keratin makeup. So you got to change that too in order to make this transitions. They have a continuous flowing lung system and compared to the bellow system. All of these things are all important if you're going to have an evolution of a bird from a reptile. It's not going to work. I hate to say it, but I don't think this idea that birds evolved into or evolved from reptiles, I don't think that theory really flies. No. Yeah, you got it. Okay. Think about migration. This is the OSHA picture of what a migration if the government gets involved with this one, right? All the things they need for safety, you know, they need them all. But the golden plover here, do you realize that thing migrates from Alaska to Hawaii nonstop in an 88-hour flight? Yeah, nonstop. How did he learn to do that? Okay, now here's a chart you'll look at right now, and you find out what happens if he doesn't store up on enough food before he starts the flight. All right, without enough, let's suppose he has so many grams of food, he'd have a fatal crash after 72 hours right in the ocean, become good fish meat, okay? But if he has too much food, he can't get off the ground. He's not going to be able to fly either. So you have to have the right balance, the amount of food for the safe arrival after 88 hours. The whole migration, it's just not birds that migrate. You have butterflies that migrate all the way from Canada to Mexico, the monarch butterfly. That's a long way to fly, isn't it? Who ever thought that was possible? But it takes them 2 generations to get down there. Okay, they have breeding ground partway down. Then we have the 3rd generation, and generally it's called the Methuselah generation, goes all the way back to Canada. Now, these little guys that just hatched out have never seen the route before, have they? Everybody else is dead. How does this work? All right, how does that work? So again, this whole migration idea is very important. Birds migrate, animals migrate, mammals do, some of them, and now insects as well. Even the common miller moth migrates. All right, and it turns out the miller moth makes one, can you realize, or can you believe that grizzly bears in Yellowstone, say, their favorite food is not tourists. It's good to know if you're going there, right? Or backpacking there. That's not their favorite food. Their favorite food turns out to be a lot of different things, but it's all vegetation. 80 to 90% of their diet is vegetation and or insects. Insects, big old grizzly, mean old ferocious grizzly bear. One of the, sometimes in their summer, just before they're preparing for hibernation, they will eat up to 30, 40,000 moths per day. They turn over these rocks, they find a horde of these things, scarf them down. Okay, that's what they do. That's amazing when you see that. But anyhow, I've been reading about it. Go in the Smithsonian magazine, you'll find it. It talks about them. 30,000, 40, they say 40,000 moths per day. And they migrate too, and that's why they are in abundance in Yellowstone, because that's on the migration route. Okay. All right, now let's look at some other things. How did this all happen by accident? Do you realize dolphins has a cooling system that works just like the radiator of your automobile? The blood is pumped up into the dorsal fin, kind of to keep cool, and then cools down the blood comes back into the body system, cools down the rest of the body. Otherwise, this poor old dolphin is going to die of heat. Okay, that's what happens. And so how did that work? How come the dolphin doesn't bake within its really thick layer of too good of insulation called blubber? How come it doesn't? Well, it's because of the cooling system of the radiator. Here's what naturalism said. Discover Magazine is a magazine committed to naturalism. Remember, I showed you how did the universe began? That was all naturalistic explanation. It started with zero, right? Nothing, which exploded. Okay, how do they explain the dolphin? By all rights, life in the sea should leave a dolphin but baked, crushed, and sterile. Here's their explanation. This graceful mammal avoids such a fate only by slipping through the loopholes in the laws of physiology. Now, doesn't that sound scientific? But did they really say anything? No, there's no explanation here at all given. And it's interesting. It just slaps a coat of paint over a problem. And we're going to see that happens very regularly in this whole area of design. Bombardier Beetles mix two different chemicals together and can produce a fiery blast into the face of an approaching frog. All right. Now, the blast is at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So it takes two chemicals, mixes them together just perfectly. You have to have storage compartments for those particular chemicals, okay? You have to have storage compartments. You have to have different sets of valves for that to work. You have to have a mixing chamber and an explosion chamber, more valves. When in the presence of oxygen, now this thing, boom, it'll go. Okay, and you have to have special enzymes in there too, by the way. All right, all those. Can you imagine the first beetle that tried to evolve this? He said, I'm tired of getting eaten by frogs. I'm going to find the right chemicals. Went to the chemistry lab, started mixing chemicals together. All right. Yeah, I know this is kind of cartoonish, but that's okay. You guys can have fun with it too. They mixed chemicals together and finally came up with the right chemicals. So that made a better Bombardier beetle, correct? No, you got a dead beetle. Why? Because you have to have all the apparatus to go with those chemicals. You have to have everything working and operating at the same time. Otherwise, this thing doesn't really function. I say that unique. It looks designed because of one thing, the engineering complexity. Okay, the systems that go into it. That complex interrelationship of parts. All right, that's why I'd say it looks like design. You know, we could talk about the design of the knee. Some of you could talk about it probably better than I can, okay? But it comes out of this book by, what's his name here? Berger. He's very well known in that particular field and in biomimicry. All right. And so he wrote this book on inspiration from creation. And so he wrote that book showing how looking at what God made gave us, and even in our own knees, other creatures, gave us ideas for artificial limbs, for other things that can be used for robots, etc. All right, we're going to get back to him in a minute. What are you looking at? Yeah. No cheating here. He knows. What was your first guess?
Kelp.
Kelp, sea kelp. But we said, no, that wasn't right. That wasn't right. Now, it turns out to be the foot of a gecko lizard. It's what it is. When you look at this with the scanning electron microscope at the pad or foot of a gecko lizard, you find out why a gecko lizard can stick to a plate of glass and actually run across a plate of glass, even hanging upside down. It's because those little feet, those pads are not suction cups. But those little fibers are so fine, like 206, close to 300 million fibers per square inch. That's pretty a lot, right? And each one of those fibers make a molecular bond with the surface it is touching. A strong molecular bond. So you can do a pull-up on that thing. All right, Parnell can do a pull-up on that thing, and the lizard wouldn't let go. I'd hate to look at the lizard after he did that, but but that's how strong those bonds are. And you say, whoa, how did that happen? So with all these bonds sticking, how does a lizard move? Look like it'd be glued to that spot, right? Well, it turns out he's not glued. He has all of those bonds are directional bonds. So not only do you have to have the mechanism for making the bonds, you have to have a directional mechanism now. All right. And so somehow he moves the foot in just exactly the right way. Guess what? Now it releases those bonds and he can move forward. So when he runs, he goes one step back, just a little tiny bit back, and then he can move forward. Isn't that neat, huh? And when he's running, he doesn't have quite as many of those bonds that are working at that moment, okay? And so it's easier for him to run too. All right, so what can we do with that? Let's make a new adhesive based upon that technology. Inspired by the gecko lizard, they are trying to make a one-sided sticky tape. One-sided, let's call it not a sticky tape, but a Velcro. All right, we know two-sided Velcro is really important, but one-sided Velcro. And sure enough, they were able to go to the laboratory after hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research, and they were able to make it. And you can buy a little bit of that now. You can buy a little piece of that gecko lizard type of a thing. It's great for hanging your picture on the wall, but I hope you have a valuable picture, because that little bit of one-sided Velcro is going to cost you probably $6,000 to $8,000. Okay, it's pretty expensive right now. And yet Gecko does it for free. Now, what they're hoping to do is make Spider-Man gloves. Wouldn't that be really nice for window washers to go up the side of a building? Right? And they can go right on up, don't have to have all these ropes and wash the windows, etc. But hopefully that window washer doesn't go in the right direction to release those bonds. Yeah. Otherwise, down he goes. All right, so think about a sea anemone. This guy is hunting. At the end of every one of his tentacles happens to be a poison missile dart capsule. It's got a trigger and a trap door and a spring-loaded missile with poison on the tip. And what happens is a fish comes along, hits that trigger, bam, this missile fires, and now the sea anemone gets a meal. Of course, you wouldn't want to eat one of these things, but others do. Okay, the sea slug actually sneaks up on it, pounces on it. Yeah, it's a little dramatized, it's okay. And he eats the entire sea anemone, digests everything, and the only thing that is not digested are those missiles. The missiles, they're not digested. So what's he gonna do with all those missiles running around in his stomach? Well, notice something. He has tentacles of his own, but he has no ability whatsoever to manufacture his own missile system. So he steals it from the sea anemone. Okay, and what he does is take it from the sea anemone and now ferries those missile capsules up into its own tentacle. And once put in place, first fish comes along, hits that trigger, bam, this thing fires. You're looking at a creature that pirates another's missile system and uses it for its own. How did that come about by accident? Is mutation and natural selection going to explain it? Because you have to explain the development of that system, first of all, and now you have to explain the complex interrelationship between animals, stealing somebody else's parts and using it for their own. I think natural selection kind of fails us there. Think about the woodpecker. It's actually a living jackhammer. and he hits his head against that tree with such a force, his eyeballs would pop out of his head, fold his beak up like an accordion, right? And you say, that's a dumb bird hitting his head against the tree. Well, he's hungry. You college students do some crazy things too, right? When you're hungry, I'm sure. Now, he hears an insect living on the inside of the bark of the tree. He's going after it. He's got really sharp hearing. But the bugs aren't stupid. They hear this guy go brrr like that, and they will scram. They will actually get out of there and go up into their tunnels and would escape, except for the long tongue of the woodpecker. Now, that tongue is 4.5 times longer than his skull. So it'd come clear down to the floor at least. You understand, that is quite a long tongue. It has sticky barbules on the end of it as well. And he slaps that down into the tunnel and sure enough, gets his meal. That's pretty unique, huh? But here's the problem. Where's he gonna put that tongue? What do you do with a tongue that long? He doesn't have a shirt pocket to put it in. Okay. Oh, here's the storage compartment for the woodpecker. The tongue comes out of the back of the mouth, goes underneath the skin, underneath the feathers, attaches up there in the beak region. It's stretchy like a rubber band, and there are muscles, special muscles that pull it down inside the chest cavity. Okay. Now, so the first one probably just left it hang out, right? Pecked it right in half, all right? So how did that happen? Which came first, the long tongue or the storage compartment if evolution is true? They both have to be working and operating, not only that, but all the different physiology. And every time you would do another change in where it attaches, every time, guess what you're gonna do? Change the physiology. It's not just simple, little bit of change by mutation and natural selection. All right, think about how well designed your eye is. Amazing design on that thing. But it's amazing design. But do you know what Dr. Richard Dawkins, one of the world's most foremost and vocal atheists, says? That's not good design, it's absurd design. And he said, I can do better. He said, there's a mass of material in the line of vision. If you move it over to the side, guess what? You'll see better. Therefore, God doesn't know what he's doing. There can't be a God. That's his argument. Argument from imperfection, basically. The problem is, if Dr. Richard Dawkins walked outside with the eye design like he said it should be, he'd be blind in 2 hours because that mass of material is a great UV protector. Besides that, that mass of material is another extremely designed system. Here's what Dr. Jonathan Sarlate says. It's a fiber optic system right there. In the eye, it demolishes, let's say, Richard Dawkins' bad design argument. All right, now, basically, here's a quote from Dr. George Marshall giving a lecture, and he basically says, I wish somebody who talks about the eye and how bad it is would go study it. Okay, he said the idea that the eye is wired backward comes from a lack of knowledge of eye function and anatomy. That's what he said, an expert in the field. Okay, all right, let's pick on Richard Dawkins again. He said, do you realize you breathe out of the same tube that you swallow food with? You do. Why, you could choke to death. So he calls that supposed design, quote, the height of stupidity. The height of stupidity. Really? Let me ask you this. How many of you sitting out there choked to death this morning? Not one of you. Something is working, right? Sure, if you run and laugh or run and eat or laugh and eat, you might have problems, okay? That may be an issue, but in general, it works really well. So, by the way, where would Dr. Richard Dawkins put an extra tube? And I'm going to say, actually, this system is superbly engineered. It makes my speech possible. Why? Even though I might have lack of oxygen sometimes, right? Especially wearing a mask. I'm sorry about that, guys. I really can't speak otherwise. But anyhow, it makes speech possible. Why? It's because of the design feature. The air, speaking is needed with the lung and the air, okay? I'm sure some of you are thinking, yeah, a lot of hot air you have, no, but yeah, you have to have the air, but you also have to have the teeth and the position of the tongue on the roof of the mouth and with the teeth in order to make speech possible. It's a whole complex thing. It's a one tube, not a multiple of tubes. Where would Richard Dawkins put that extra tube, by the way? And if he put another tube in, he's got a big problem. What's he going to do about a piece of food that gets caught halfway down when he's trying to swallow a piece of food? How's he going to get out of there? Well, we know how we do it. We cough it up, right? That's how we do it. We have that force of the lungs to hopefully do that. So maybe Richard Dawkins might send a fish hook down and reel it out, right? Or maybe he takes a giant plunger, boom, kaboom, kaboom, pushes it down into the stomach. Who knows? To me, I say it's superbly engineered like a Swiss Army knife, all kinds of functions in one little package. And that talks about an engineered system right there. I think about my computer, well designed, but it won't come close to doing what your computer does inside your head. Do you realize your computer works faster than mine? Or even the IT specialist over here, right? Yeah, yours works better, except for the day of the exam. I hate to tell you that, but yeah, your brain has more synapses than the number of stars in 1,500 Milky Way sized galaxies. That's a lot. The single brain has more switches than all the computers and routers and internet connections on the face of planet Earth. And it all happened by accident? How does naturalism explain this? Okay, well, here it is. Perhaps an early cell, billions of years ago, developed a sensitivity to other cells. Then it is conceivable it would be on its way to becoming a human brain. How would it do that? Well, mutations and natural selection, right? That's a lot of faith to believe that's going to happen, in my perspective, okay? And there are two words there that are not scientific, perhaps and conceivable. It's that coat of paint on it, trying to put a naturalistic explanation. And frequently we are conditioned in our education system. I hate to tell you this, we are conditioned to think if we can come up with any idea of how it could possibly have worked, then that is sufficient to say we don't have to believe in a creator. That's a problem, isn't it? We're conditioned that way, right here at the university even. All right. But they found an ancient brain in the Cambrian, which is where life started proliferating at all. And it looks exactly like the crustacean today. Exactly, with the same brain pattern. They were actually able to do the brain scan on that particular arthropod. And supposedly 500 some million years old, no change, etc. Okay, have you heard that 95%, maybe 98% of the DNA in your body is junk left over from millions of years of evolution? How many have heard that? Yeah, that is absolutely false, okay? They thought it because they hadn't studied it is the problem. And Mary Jo's going to be talking about that more, showing tomorrow, junk DNA is not junk DNA, okay? By the way, the design of it is important. That you remember the twisted ladder idea? Actually, it's more than just a twisted ladder. It's much more complex than that, even though that in itself is a computer program that's extremely complex. Just on one strand of DNA, do you realize you can store every book that's cataloged in the Library of Congress? Every book can be put on one strand of DNA. as far as computer storage system. All right. Dr. Robert Carter wrote a book or did a video. And he talks about the high-tech cell, Dr. Robert Carter. He says it's the most complex information storage mechanism in the known universe. Wow. It just happened by accident, correct? No, it looks designed. All right. He said we have to change our thinking due to modern genetic research. This is really important. When the more we study, the more detail we see, the more engineered complex systems we see. It says DNA is not 1 or 2 dimensions as originally believed. It is a 4-dimensional system. All right, it's 4-dimensional. Now, we're not going to go into that. He goes into great detail, but here's a kind of a summary of what he said. The genome is a multi-dimensional operating system. Okay, that's good to know. Different than our computers, a whole lot more. It has built-in error correction. How would you like it if your computer could correct any errors? All right, or modify the codes, the computer codes when it needs to. Okay, wow. There are multiple overlapping DNA codes. I bet you thought there was only one. But there are RNA codes, structural codes, and then 22,000 or so protein coding genes combinatorially create several 100,000 distinct proteins. All right, now, if you don't think that is design, take it up with Dr. Robert Carter. All right, really, he is an expert in that field, okay? Get his DVD and get that on our website if you want. Okay, now I'm gonna have to say something here. Every one of these design features that I have already mentioned, every one of them are usually dismissed by something we've been programmed to say. You know what we've been programmed to say? This is naturalism. We can imagine how mutations and natural selection acting over millions of years might refine systems and even produce them. We've been taught that, correct? All the way through, we've been taught to believe in naturalism, and we're taught to stay in the box. Don't think there's a designer out there, right? We've been taught that you have to explain everything with a naturalistic viewpoint. Mary Jo tomorrow night is going to mention Dr. John Sanford, who's one of the top genetic researchers in the country. Okay, wrote a book called The Downward Trend of the Genome, Genetic Entropy. And in that particular book, here's his statement, and she's gonna be supporting that even more. The idea that evolution proceeds by mutation and natural selection is absolutely dead wrong from all kinds of ways to analyze it. And he has done that. Okay, now we're not going to go into that any further, but that's tomorrow night right here. Okay, if you had to make a decision, which one of those would you claim wasn't designed? And what's it based upon? Are you talking about how intricate and it can fly, maneuverability, weight lift, right? If you do any of those things, it turns out the bottom two would be designed, because even the dragonfly can lift 25 times his body weight. It's an amazing system of the dragonfly wings. You know about the intricate flight of the hummingbird. Boy, we wish we could devise a helicopter that could do that. You better believe it, we would. Well, think about the wings of the dragonfly. And by the way, when we look at dragonflies in the fossil record, they're identical way back in the fossil record than they are as they are today. Okay, way down deep in the layers. All right, now I mentioned about Burgess here. Burgess, the book Inspiration from Creation, he's actually analyzes, and this is one of his main fields, analyzes the flight of the dragonfly in order to make a nice miniature drone. Okay, that's what they're looking at. How do you do it? And in it, he has discovered an amazing technology. So get that book on interlibrary loan, or go to your, I doubt if you'll find it in your library, but at least go get it, okay? But anyhow, one of the things that I thought was kind of fun, what he said, was, wow, that dragonfly is like a submarine in the larval stage that is also an amphibious vehicle that can climb out of the water and then turn into a helicopter without any factory or group of mechanics to help. Don't you love that? I do. Anyhow, how many got a cut in the last 100 years? Raise your hand. Yeah, we all did, huh? We all got a cut. And why didn't we die? Because we have a powerful blood pressurized system. We should watch our blood spurt out of our bodies, what we should do until we're dead. Well, it turns out we have what's called a blood clotting system that keeps us from dying, okay? Keeps us from dying right there. And we have quite a number of different chemicals that all have to be working. They have to be there. They have to be in an inactive stage. And the entire system works, or none of it works at all. So far, so good? All right, so that's what we have to have. Now, like for instance, what makes your blood clot? It's a substance called fibrin. It's a long sticky molecule, grabs a hold of the blood vessel. When you get a whole web across it, keeps the blood cells from going by. This is simplified, okay? But anyhow, so that's what's going to make your clot. But what happens if fibrin's in your body, in your blood right now? You have blood clots throughout the entire system. You're dead, correct? You're a goner. So it has to exist in the inactive form called fibrinogen. All right, but when you get a cut, something's got to turn it on. And that is a piece of that second word called thrombin. Thrombin activates or turns the switch on to make fibrin, and you're okay. But what happens if you have a bunch of thrombin in your blood right now? It turns on all the fibrinogen, you're dead again. So it's got to be turned on by an active form of Stewart factor. Okay, something's got to activate it. All are necessary. Make it short. And how do you even make Stewart factor? An active form is Stewart factor. Well, you start with an inactive one, and look at all this extra chemical subsystems, engineered flow chart of what has to happen in order to activate that. So you see, it doesn't look so simple anymore, right? You eliminate one of these things, you're probably going to be dead. Okay, it's not going to work. You have to have them all working and operating basically at the same time. So I say that looks like an engineered system. It's called a cascade system in engineering, by the way. All right. So just think about it for a little bit. I'm going to go back one here. Design. Dr. Michael Bay, he wrote a book one time. It's called Darwin's Black Box. Okay, black box. And what he does is talk about a mousetrap system. Take a mousetrap. You got all kind. You have basically just a few parts. But if one of those parts is missing, guess what? It doesn't work as a mousetrap, right? Oh yeah, agreed. Maybe you can use it as a tie bar, right? Which if you wear ties, okay. Maybe you could use it as that, but it's not. But you eliminate the parts and it doesn't work. And that's what is happening with many of these biological systems. You eliminate some of those proteins that are making an electric motor. And this electric motor is allowing this one cell creature to go around and be able to find food. This is really interesting. One cell. It's going to go use a motorboat, basically, all part of that cell. But that entire motorboat assembly of that motor, and then what they call the flagellum, all are proteins. All proteins. There are about 40 proteins that make up this system. If you eliminate one of them, it doesn't work. So you have to have all these proteins working together in order to get a molecular motor. So how do you get that? Well, I frequently hear from students, didn't you know Scientific American answered that? Did you know that? They answered that major problem, okay? But their answer were, perhaps we can imagine explanations. All right, it was basically slapping a coat of paint on it. And they give you this, point number one, point number two, and then there's a point number three. And so here's the Scientific American's argument. And he's talking specifically about the flagellum part, okay? And okay, well, wow, it might have been used for something else. Now it's migrated over to become a flagellum for this one-celled creature. Sounds really good. But Dr. Jonathan Servati over here went point by point down Scientific American's argument. He says this actually comes from Scott Jenner's misuse of this guy's who wrote that article, his misuse of the research of Dr. Scott Minish, a worldwide class expert on the flagellum. He says that the belief in design has given him many research insights, by the way. And he also says this particular thing that they say is what's going to lead up to flagellum is actually a degeneration from the flagellum. So you have something better. All right, and then he goes, point two, here's the eye, number two, number three, he says this, the final evolution of the flagellum might then, according to National Geographic or Scientific American, might then have involved only the novel recombination of sophisticated parts. It sounds really good, sounds like a great argument, except for one thing. Sarvati points out that that might explain only 10 of the 40 components by this co-option idea, but the other 30 are brand new. So where do they come from now? And then he says this, the very process of assembly in the right sequence requires other regulator machines. So it itself is irreducibly complex for the mousetrap system. Okay, now I just want to let you know about that. Okay, when you actually look at that, the argument the Scientific American was making is similar to the idea that if you have an electrical parts warehouse, you have all the parts in there for an electric motor, don't you? You have all of the parts, say. But do they assemble themselves without an engineer doing it? Or somebody knows what he's doing? No, they don't. So the order and way you put it together is even more important than having the parts and pieces. Follow that? Okay, that's what's going on there. And so otherwise we'd have all kinds of motors popping out into existence. Talking about motors, it's really important to think. I want you to look at the end of your little finger. Got that? Take a look at it. Do you realize there are more electric motors in the cells of your little finger, total number of electric motors, than you have in the entire world's inventory of electric motors and gasoline engines? There are more right there. Whoa, you didn't even know. You don't even think about it, do you? Yeah, you've got so many different ones right there. And this information one time, started doing my own after that, but came originally from a TED Talk. And somebody who is a highly credentialed scientist who works in this area, it was talking about it. You have over 20,000 types of molecular machines and motors working in your body. Just in humans alone, over 20,000. Folding machine, pumps, valves, force generators. Okay, you have all this stuff. And even an energy producing motor. that actually works strictly on proteins. That takes 30 proteins to make this motor right here. And what it does, it causes things to move and grind together like a grinding machine. But it's an electric motor that's spinning at 9,000 revolutions per minute. That's how efficient it is. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. But how could we possibly get, say, that one that's going to produce energy for you? And what it does is take another chemical, mixes a proton with it, cranks it out, produces ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. That gives you the energy you need in order to stay alive. Okay, that's very important for this little machine. Okay, what are the steps to produce it? Let's think about it. First of all, you've got your DNA, which is a nice strand. Let's simplify it a little bit. And it's that ladder-like. Now let's split the DNA, unzip it. So we have, and first before we can do that, we have to unwind it because it's 3 feet of DNA into that little tiny part of the cell. It's tightly packed. Okay. If, yeah, I won't go into those details there, but you have to, first of all, unwrap it, unwind it. Then you unzip it. Okay. So you have a zipper on there, but now you don't want to use the original DNA. Don't lose out on this. I want you to think, is this logical? The mutations in natural selection is going to produce it. So what do we have here? We've got to first unwind that DNA. We've got to unzip it. So there are different types of machines that do it. Now we have to take a picture, a copy of just one little section of that DNA. And that's the section that's going to code for a specific protein. When it's done, the protein is going to be a string of beads, each bead being an amino acid. Okay, each one being an amino acid. All right, some of those amino acid ones might be 200 beads in the string. Another code one might be 4,000 in a string, and they have to have every bead in place. Otherwise, it's non-functional as a protein. Okay, that's what's going on here. So you got to copy it, but then you got to cut it. So you got a cutting machine there. And now you call UPS. Get them on the phone, get UPS here, because now you have to take this copy of the instructions into what's called the ribosome. The ribosome are those little tiny polka dots on that. There's a lot of them, okay? You need that. And that ribosome is going to manufacture, it's going to assemble the perfect protein that you need for the job. That's what's going to happen. It's in a factory there. The ribosome is an RNA complex machine that involves more than, you're going to make proteins with it, but it's got already, in order for it to work, has 300 proteins that makes up the ribosome. It forms a complex where the messenger RNA is translated into protein, assembled with the right beads in the right spot, the right amino acids, okay? And therefore plays a crucial role in making the right protein synthesis. Now I'm making it pretty simple because I'm simple, all right? Anyhow, so the ribosome is a protein manufacturing machine. But if you get too much being produced, guess what? You crank out too much, that's not good either. So you've got a regulator DNA machines as well. Okay, now let's suppose we've now assembled it. You've got a string of beads like this, okay? Maybe 400 in a row. So far, so good. Now, that's not a working protein yet. It's just a string of beads, all right? So that string of beads has to be ushered in to another machine. So you have to call UPS again. Transport this over to the folding machine because it's a folded protein that actually does the good work. All right, it's a folded one. And for the smaller proteins, it'll put the same amino acids all folded perfectly together. I don't know why, but that's the way it was set up. God did that. So you got to fold it to the precise shape. What do you think you're going to do once you get it perfectly folded? We now have a working protein. You call UPS, get UPS out there again, because that's got to be now transported to another part of the cell. And it's kind of like this. Cells are small, right? But what's inside of it is like a universe or a city inside that cell. And you have to go from where it's manufactured clear over, say, to the other end of the cell where the energy is being produced. That's a long ways to go, right? So you have to call UPS to go deliver that thing. It just doesn't happen. And there are transport. Where are you going to deliver it to? You're going to deliver it to the site where you're going to have the synthase machine. Okay? That's what you're going to do. ATP synthase enzyme. Here's what David Godsill is, a cell biologist and a machine modeler. He said that this is one of the wonders of the molecular world. That's what they're saying about it. There are 32 proteins based, 2 distinct rotary motors joined by a stator powered by protons. This is amazing, isn't it? What's going on there? All right, and when it's all said and done, you get the right proteins in the right spot. What do you have? You've got that motor turning at 9,000 RPMs, and that's going to crank out the energy you need. So how does UPS get there? This is so important. How does UPS get there? Well, in order to get from this side of Minneapolis to the other side, guess what you need? Highways, don't you? There's a lot going on in there. So you need a highway construction system, and that we have it in every one of those cells. It's a microtubular highway construction system. So highways, get this, we found out with the electron scanning microscope and the more refinements of that, what's going on inside that cell. This is going on. So why do you need a highway? Well, here comes the UPS guy. That's why. And he's coming. He's got a bag of proteins that are all labeled. So you have to have a labeling machine somewhere in there. And it's going to go to the various parts of that cell. And it's actually, it is called the kinesin transport machine. Now, this thing is going to take that bag, put it in the right spots, going right down that microtubular highway, and it goes so fast. It looks like it just ambles around, but it goes so fast. It's like me basically running at 1,200 miles per hour. This is how fast things are going inside there. Okay, 120 or 1,200 miles per hour. It gets it, drops its load, now goes back for more. Okay, interesting. On a different highway, by the way. Howard Berg from Harvard University says this: these are the most efficient machines in the universe. Now, how did it happen? By accident. How did it happen? By mutations. Natural selection. All of this stuff has to be working and operating, even to have it to be living and to be able to respond to an environment, correct? All is working and operating, is working together. Whew. Now it gets deeper. No, it does get a lot deeper. Guess what? In the early 80s, they knew nothing about this. They really knew nothing about what was going on. And in fact, Dawkins made a point one time, put it on his video, it's been used in videos, classes, and in as a supplement in many, many university and high school classes. And Richard Dawkins said, wait a minute, there are 4 different codons that the DNA can code to give you the very same amino acid glycine. He said, that's wasteful, redundant. There can't be a God. Okay, that's what he says. That's his proof. Okay, wow. Well, guess what? What would I say to Dr. Richard Dawkins if he told me that? I'd say, well, I suggest we do more research to find out why. Okay, do more research. Don't just dismiss it, find out why. And sure enough, that would be my prediction as a creationist. And sure enough, they went in, they did the research. Notice those codons only differ by one letter. Okay, only by one letter there. When they did it, you remember that folding machine? Okay. That extra letter tells how long and to what degree of folding you need to apply to the string of beads. Time, another dimension coming in here, right? So, whoa, this is really interesting. It wasn't redundant. It controls the timing of the folding. In fact, if you want to read more about it, read that in Frontiers in Genetics in 2014, where they said the redundancy of genetic code, what Dawkins was talking about, enables translational pausing. Now, that's pretty technical, but the amount of folding and the degree of folding is what they're talking about. Whew. I think the plot thickens. It even gets more complex when you realize what all is going on inside of one cell. Okay. All right. So make sure you look at, hey, yeah. Okay. There it is. Frontiers to Genetics right there. It's junk DNA. No way. It is so well designed. So well designed. What's the answer by naturalism? Well, before they knew anything about any of these things, there's Dr. George Wald in the Smithsonian, in the Scientific American, 1954. He stated this: time is in fact the hero of the plot. We have 2 billion years to work with. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One has only to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. Now, does that sound nice and naturalistic? Right, there it is, time. This is almost always what I get from some of the professors that I speak with, okay? Oh, given enough time, anything can happen. How many have heard that before? Given enough time, anything can, yep, a lot of nods. Yeah, well, guess what? That was said in 1954. People have been parroting what he said ever since. And the time is not the hero of the plot, by the way. He didn't do the math. He just didn't do the math. He didn't realize what the stacking the odds against him were. And what's the probability of even making one simple protein? I'm not talking about 4,000 amino acids in length. I'm talking about a simple one. What's the probability? I figured it out one time and presented that in the university statistics class I was teaching at Colorado Mesa University. Okay, I've calculated. It's pretty easy to do if we make some simplifying assumptions. The probability, yes, takes a lot of faith, was one chance out of number 10 times 10 times 10, 260 times. Now you have to understand this is a big number. How big? How many marbles could you fit into the entire known universe? Say 100 times bigger than what anybody has ever suggested. Here's the number, only 10 times 10, 84 times. So what's this mean? The probability of making one simple protein is like hiding a blue marble in a universe filled with green marbles. Going out blindfolded in a spaceship as far as you want, any direction you want, accidentally finding that marble. And not only that, now if I hide it again, if you can find this thing, you lucky person, 3 times in a row. That would be 100 million times easier than making that one simple protein. At that point in that University of Statistics, we actually did the calculation. I actually showed them how to do it. And I said, I don't know what they teach you about these kind of odds in biology, but in statistics, we call that zero. Really. Guess what? That was 5 minutes before I heard from the department chairman. He said, I understand you're preaching religion in the classroom. I said, well, not really. Here's what I told the students. Never mention anything about religion or God or anything. And I showed them exactly what I showed the students, which I was so glad to be able to do. Okay. And he was a department chairman. And I said, now, is that religion? He said, well, I guess not. However, this creation versus evolution subject is a touchy subject at this university. You had better drop it. I didn't. That's why I can be here with you tonight. Okay. Yep, that's what happened. All right. So is there censorship? Guess what? That was already in the 1980s. Okay. 1980s. Okay, when that occurred. All right. So probability speaks volumes against this happening. And by the way, when I actually did those calculations, this is when we knew nothing about the inner working of that cell. We knew nothing about those electric motors in your end of your little finger. Nothing about that. We didn't know about the calling UPS and the microtubular highways and these molecular machines that use 30 proteins, 32 in the machine that's going to produce your energy. So the chance of making 32 of them, specific ones, are you understanding now? What does that do to the probability? The probability against it is raised to the 30th power. Wow. And that's not even a cell. Okay, and yet it takes DNA to make proteins. It takes proteins to make DNA. It takes 300 proteins specific in order to make the RNA, which is going to assemble the computer instructions to make the protein. 300 of them. So that astronomically takes those odds about it happening by accident. An atheist and an agnostic decided to check it out. And they did some calculation. They said at that point, the chance of making one, what they called simple cell, was one chance out of 10 to the 40,000th power. And by the way, when they did this, they knew nothing about all the machines in the end of your finger. They knew nothing about all that stuff. And then they compared that in another publication to the chance of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and producing that Boeing 747 by accidents. Right? Do you know what they said? This is an atheist and an agnostic. They eventually said, there must be a God, quoted in the newspapers saying that. But they didn't run out and buy a Bible, Parnell, or come talk to Parnell about who that God is, right? You could give them information about that. No, they didn't do that at all. They said in the article, we are still looking for a way around our conclusions. That's what they said. They're still looking for a naturalistic explanation, aren't they? They're not going to find it, I'm afraid. Okay, so what's the naturalistic explanation to all of this? Number one, given enough time, anything can happen. That's just a hope. That is not reality, okay? That's a slap of paint across it, right? Mutation, natural selection can produce all this design. That is a slap of coat, but it doesn't fit, doesn't work. There's too much engineering principles going in here. But then, besides that, here's what they will say. This is Dr. Scott Todd, and was in a court case whether or not intelligent design should be allowed to be presented in schools in Kansas, United States. Okay, the state of Kansas. He said this, Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. Students, you ever feel like you're put in a box? Don't breathe outside of that box, right? Don't let your mind get outside of the naturalistic box at all. And that's what we're being taught all the time, aren't we? Okay, so, wow. You know, evolution is not science, it's philosophy, posing as though it were science, okay? There are so many articles coming out these days. It's wonderful about the tremendous design features of the DNA. Studies by secular university coming out showing this didn't happen by accident, okay? Even though they can't say that, but the evidence seems to point that. I believe it's a great day to be a Bible-believing creationist. And it's a better day to go find out who that creator is, okay? If you want to know about this creator, you want to find out, boy, I think that's an amazing creator that can do it. Go talk to one of us, like Parnell or me tonight, or Mary Jo. Please do it. Find out who that creator is. One of the things I can tell you about that creator, he's an artist. Look what he's made. And not only is he an artist, he loves beauty. It's all over this universe, isn't it? He loves beauty. It's not just, oh, that's pretty. That's not how you tell design. It's the complex interworking of every cell in that duck's body, right? Or in your body. You know, God's design is amazing. You have worth because of God's design. So when we look at that, look at beauty, it could have been a black and white world. But the closer you look at what it is, the more beauty you see. Okay? In fact, you can go and look at the tiniest things in the cell, the DNA. How about the molecular machines? What do you see? Beauty and design evidence, don't you? You get the closer you look, the better it gets. That's an evidence of a design system. Okay? That's what you see, created by God. And so God is interested in the details of his creation. What that tells me, he's interested in the details of me. He's interested in the details of you. Your life is worth something, isn't it? In his eye, okay? But you know what? And that's the little stuff. He's interested in the details, but he's also interested in the big picture, in creating the entire universe, isn't he? Okay. All right. And we need to be reset. Just that. All right. So look at the size of the universe. Big. How many stars? I counted them yesterday. No, there's no way I'm going to do that. But the Bible says God numbers the stars. Wow. Calls them all by name. That's a powerful God. But the verse right next to that is Psalm 147:3, right before it. He says, God heals the brokenhearted and binds up all their wounds. This is a God who's powerful enough to do something about us in our pain, right? He's powerful. He can do it if we let him do it. All right. So all of this to me says evidence is crying out there was a creator. He created things with the design. So I call grand design or blind chance, grand design. Okay. So we're going to stop here. So can't we see evolution in action? No. Come talk to Mary Jo or see Mary Jo's presentation tomorrow. Some of the best proofs for evolution. What's wrong with it? Okay. That's what we have tomorrow night. The night after that, Friday night, right here, same time, same station. Lots of time or lots of water. What about geology? What about archaeology? We're talking about both of those things, okay? And remember, we have a free newsletter as well. And for those of you who want to go on a tour with one of us, like Yellowstone or Costa Rica, we do those too. All right, go to our website and find out more information. There's a lot of stuff. Okay, so I'd say, wow, there's many things for you. Okay, come to our Yellowstone tour. In fact, what's it, Saturday night, I'm going to be talking about the tremendous design of the creation evidences found in Yellowstone National Park. All right, and that's we give tours there frequently. And remember that high-tech cell? Go to the website and find it if you want to know the specific details. So discover creation, worship the creator. That's what we need to do, okay? And we're going to stop here. And we're going to ask, are there any questions? Got to set some ground rules here, huh? Let me go. I don't need any of these books.
Thanks, Dave.
There it is, right there.
Appreciate it.
Good to be here with you. Thank you so much for everybody was listening. Wonderful. I love it. Okay.
So we are Maranatha Christian Church that sponsored this event, and Maranatha Christian Fellowship, the student group. And the presentations are going to be recorded, or they are being recorded tonight and the next couple nights on campus. So we are going to post them on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to, if you can't make it later and you want to come check it out, or you want to check it out online, go to Spirit Formed like with an ED, spiritformed.com, or you can grab one of our flyers if you need to remember that. And there's a little YouTube link and you can check it out. So that's that. And if you want a flyer reminder of the upcoming events this week that Dave talked about, take it with you from the table. And Dave, who do you think that creator is?
I think he's the God of the Bible. Who do you think it is?
Yeah, the Bible says that there is one name given to us under heaven by which we can be saved, and that is the name of Jesus Christ. And so this creator has revealed himself in history as a person, Jesus Christ. And this person came, taught amazing things, did amazing things, but then was brutally killed, right? Suffered on a Roman cross. And the Bible says if we could be saved by the works of the law, by our righteousness, by being good enough, then it says this Christ, this Holy One, that's what Christ means, this anointed one from God that was foretold, that he died in vain. So he wasn't brutally treated the way he was if we could be good enough to go to heaven without him. So it's important that you know the name of this creator, how to know this creator. Is the person of Jesus Christ. You can find out about him in the Bible. He has changed many of our lives. He wants to change your life. He wants you to believe in him and know him, so that when you die and you face God and are accountable for everything you did in the body, that you can pass from death to life. You can pass through judgment into life. So he took the judgment of our sins on himself, that if we trust in him, repent, means confess our sins and forsake them, put our trust in him, that we can be saved. So that's that creator. He loves you. He's amazing. So I just wanted to plant that seed with you. Also, one of the things, we're going to get to Q&A in just a second. One of the things that is amazing to me is just the family of God. So when you meet people that know Jesus, they ought to be loving, they ought to be kind, they ought to be warm and friendly. A place where you can find a community of support, of people that you can trust, that are going to care about you and aren't going to use you or take advantage of you. We hope that that's who we are at Maranatha. So we invite you to come check us out again. You can grab a flyer, you can sign up if you're interested in hearing about our future events, or if you just want to come say hi, just leave your information. So God bless you. The Bible says that he takes the solitary and puts them in families. So I used to be lonely and lost, and I found a family of people that knew the truth and that were real people. And it's called the Christian Church, the body of Christ. And I found a family. It was pretty amazing. I have my own biological family, but I also found a family of God. And that's what's available to you on campus through us and other ministries too. There's a lot of good ministries on this campus. So with that being said, we're gonna have, if you'd like to ask any questions, if you have any questions about what was spoken? You think, maybe I don't understand the design in that, or what about this question I learned in class? How do you answer that? Just any question you want. Now's the time. We have this room for some time yet, so if there could be group questions, or if not, you can hang around and talk. You can have individual questions, or just say hi to us. So with that being said, feel free to ask.
And bring Mary Jo up here too. Come on up. I turn over all the hard questions to her, and almost always they're always hard. Go ahead. We're going to ask one question, then go on to somebody else, then ask somebody else, etc.
My question is this: the reason why that the Darwin's theory of evolution is still a theory after over getting 180 years, as opposed to, let's say, Newton's law of gravity, and so some of those reasons that you brought up, like engineering, things, or some of the reasons why it's not been decided by the scientific community to become a law yet, or like, for example, there's some holes, in other words.
Yes.
So, Mary Jo, if you don't mind, because we're recording it, because he wasn't mic'd.
Okay.
If you think you understand the question, you can restate it before you answer it.
Thank you.
I think what you're asking is how come they still call it a theory of evolution instead of the law of evolution? And yes, a theory it hasn't been demonstrated enough that it has no holes in it, basically. Once things are scientifically demonstrated over and over and over and over again, they become a law. Just terminology, really. But a theory is still, yes, is still being debated. The evidence has not proven it. And really in science, you can never really prove anything anyway by science. You can maybe disprove things in science, but you can't prove them for sure. You can mount up a whole bunch of evidence that would demonstrate that the truth of something, that, preponderance of truth would point that way, but you can't prove things scientifically. So you can't prove evolution, and you can't prove creation either. When it comes right down to it, either one of them requires faith, because none of us were there in the beginning. And so, we can look at the scientific evidence. We might say we believe the scientific evidence points to this creator that you're talking about. Or others would take a look at that evidence and say they believe it points to evolution. Now, we believe, after having studied both of these ideas, that the preponderance of the data points strongly to a creator. But that's, in the end, it's a belief, and we don't deny that. But we also realize that what is taught as fact in classrooms and museums and on TV and everywhere around this world, that idea of evolution, they call it a theory, but oftentimes it's taught as fact, even though it's officially called a theory. And so we would just encourage you to look at both sides of this issue.
Yes.
So going back to like the first part of your presentation, when you were talking about how you didn't think that things could possibly have that much complexity naturally. Am I stating that right? Am I missing?
I believe I was talking about when you were asking the question, was I looking at, because of the certain types of complexity, certain types of what that are engineered principles, and what you're going to look at, you can pretty well tell that there was a design engineer, or let's say a designer, that did it. If that's what you're referring to, yes, I would think that. Close enough, yeah.
Yeah. So are you guys familiar at all with like cellular automata? It's like it's a new thing. It's basically for like computer stuff. You have a grid of these squares, and you give the squares a rule for when they come off, and then randomly pick a bunch of squares, and sometimes it just does stuff like magic. And I just wondered if you guys had heard about it, because that was
Yep.
cellular It's automata, it's auto. It's auto, and then MATA.
Cellular
Automata.
automata.
So, automata.
Yeah,
That's,
Yeah.
I don't know.
but somebody's programming that, right?
Yeah, so they choose the rules.
Yeah.
So like it'd be like choosing
Yeah.
the laws of physics, and then they just put a bunch of particles essentially randomly down,
Right.
and then they just do stuff. They make these sometimes they do nothing. Sometimes they make these huge complex.
Right. But somebody's programming it to start with.
To know what to select for. In other words, it tells it, the program actually, and I used to do computer programming too. I used to teach computer programming many years ago, actually. Even though today it's vastly different than what I started with, okay? And, yeah, you have to program it. You have to program the thing to look for certain things to produce something. And that puts the tremendous element of intelligence involved in that, to tell it, program it what to do and how to select for it, okay? And so how many generations can you do, iterations can you do with a computer program on something to finally get something? Now this computer spits it out because you program, when you get to this stage, you spit that out, okay? And so that's how I would look at it right there. Would you agree with that as an IT specialist, or?
I agree.
I'm glad. I thought everything changed since I used to teach it. No.
Yeah.
I think the most famous example of those cellular adoptive programs is probably Conway's Game of Life. It's from like the 70s. It's a very primitive kind of cell-based system. So there are very simple rules that dictate whether or not a cell is on or off. Those are the only two states a cell can be in. Because it's a grid, every cell has 8 neighbors. And so if there are 4 neighbors that are on, the cell turns off from overpopulation. If there are 2 or fewer that are on, then it dies from isolation. So those are the only rules that usually get imported into the system. And there are people who have intentionally designed very complicated machines using those very simple rules. As far as initial configurations that create those machines, I don't know how cool it is. It's supposed to act as an extremely simplified model of the world, right? With these extremely primitive processes, which are obviously much simpler than ours. So a lot of people use it as this excuse. Well, I don't think excuse. They use it as an example of complexity that arrives from extremely simple rules. So it's not really. I really don't know. It's not determined whether or not these kind of systems interacting parts of the merge as people have designed them in Conway's Game of Life. I don't know if it's possible. So I figured I would just.
Okay, yeah, the comment was about, see if I'm saying this right, Conway's Game of Life, using very, very simple rules, was able to come up with some sort of complex, theoretically at least, some complex theoretical machines. But you know what, you always have to go back to what do you start with, which is what you also brought out, is you've got to start with something, right?
Cells.
And
It's these designed, like, originally you select which cells are on or off.
Right.
In the,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and every single frame or whatever updates the state of the board.
sure.
So with certain configurations that are very specifically chosen, you can create, lifelike, extremely complicated interacting machinery.
Yeah,
However, it is unpredictable.
right. Right, and you still have not explained then the origin of the original components of the system.
Of course.
And
That's
so,
right.
so this game, as I understand what you're saying, is yes, it's taking some things and programming them, and you can get it to do certain things, but it's based on rules that are already there. And the question is, I mean, when you really go back to regress far enough back, you're either going to come to a supernatural creator, or you're going to come to some sort of event that came from what? Either matter and eternal or matter and energy are eternal, or you have a supernatural creator who's eternal, or you get everything coming from nothing by chance, which is what that Discover magazine said. It all popped into existence from nothing. And we used to say, that's just ridiculous. No intelligent person would think everything could come from nothing by accident and chance. I mean, you've got to have something to start with, right? At least it seems like it. And so you just keep going back far enough, and you arrive at a faith statement one way or the other. You do need to have, in this experiment, even, you're starting out with something. You're starting with programmed into it some sort of a system with rules, with grid, with
Even if it's a couple rules.
proposed things in those grids and so on. So again, to me, that what that shows is that humans have a very creative minds to be able to program these things. And I mean, we're looking a lot today at artificial intelligence, and we might exceed our abilities by creating computers that can do things we can't do fast enough, you know, that the computer can do faster than we could do humanly. But those machines were still programmed by somebody or something, right? In the case of artificial intelligence, they're designed by human beings, and they're programmed according to doing things certain ways. And, you know, is it possible that they could exceed our human intelligence? Maybe it is, but that doesn't mean that it came about from nothing in the beginning. Just because we can program something that can do something I can't do. I mean, we could give you a great big fancy mathematical problem, and the computer could solve it faster than we could solve it. But that doesn't mean that, but that's only because the computer was programmed to do that in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
So at the outset of that anyway, you would say there was a creator then who created this whole universe to be able to self-exist, self-run, self-whatever, put it all together, I guess. And you know, is there a supernatural creator in the beginning that did that? We believe biblically and otherwise that the creator had a more direct role in all of that creation. It's not just start it all off and let it all roll.
Part of that, what you're talking about, is trying to explain the origin of information to begin with, is what it is. And that's been a big bugaboo for evolution for so many years. How do you go from a cell, goo, you know, muddy, gooey mixture, which goo does not have much information, all the way to you that has in your DNA has enough information on one DNA molecule. It's going to, the information content of that, if you stack them up in a stack of encyclopedias, will reach from here to the moon at least and back. Okay, that's how many volumes of encyclopedia we're talking about. And so what we're looking at is, how did that information come about from no information? And that's been a huge bugaboo. So that's why the computers are being programmed in order to be able to try to make sense out of no information becoming information. And so, but again, like I say, yes, there are some basic rules, and there has to be something that selects when you get something good. And and you have to have something in there that recognizes that design in all of that situation. So how is that done in natural processes? Okay. And so artificial intelligence and natural processes are on the opposite ends of the universe. Okay. I'm going to say that just from my experiences. Okay. Another question, sir.
I think you brought up a point I'm curious about is where does the naturalist worldview account for the input of information into DNA or creatures? Like you start from a basic single cell and you were just talking about going to humans.
Mhm.
Clearly you need to add some type of information.
Lots
into
of
that.
information.
A lot, probably.
Volumes.
Lots. Yeah.
Well, how do they explain that? Where do they get it?
Well, that's been a huge problem, and that's what this computer program is possibly trying to explain. Okay, but it doesn't. It's in my book. It does not explain that. So that is a big bugaboo. How do you go from zero information to encyclopedic type of information? Let's see.
It also doesn't explain how do you get life in the first place.
It doesn't.
That's a really big hurdle. Is even if you could say that there was a big bang and that there were some sort of molecules that came out of that, then how do we cross that barrier between what is life, what is not life, to become life? And really, I mean, science today, we still can't quantify what life is. Nobody's ever done it in the lab. There's been no ability demonstrated in laboratory to produce a living system from non-living molecules. And there's been some experiments that they said, well, they got a little bit of amino acids or something produced, but that's
That's
still a
not
long,
much.
long way from life, because
Right.
life is that complex of pieces and parts, but there's something, I mean, you think about it, what's the difference between a live animal and a dead animal? Something happens. What happens? There's a life force that leaves. I mean, you could count you could compare the chemicals in those bodies before and after death. The chemicals are basically the same, but life is something different. And according to scripture, we believe the life comes from God, that God is life, it says in him is life. And so, that life force is coming from God. Otherwise, we have to explain the life force coming about from non-life accidentally, or you end up saying, well, the whole universe is intelligent and it's always been there. Which in some ways makes the universe God then, but it's an impersonal God, and now all of a sudden you're trying to attribute godlike characters to matter and energy.
How many have heard, or are they still teaching? Let me ask you this: are they still teaching in biology classes, whether in high school or college, the Stanley Miller experiment of how you got the amino acids? Yep, people are shaking their head. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The lightning bolts and whatever, and all that kind of stuff, and Sidney Fox, and then all this kind of stuff to try to get something. But what is interesting about that is that was what,
1953, wasn't it? Something like that. Wouldn't you expect that from 1953 until now, there would be
67, 68 years of research trying to do it, and they haven't gotten much further.
some better experiments, something that would have
Yeah.
followed up on that, and yet it hasn't been done. I'm sure if it was ever done in the laboratory, that it would be all over the papers and all over the internet.
Well, they did. It was in the papers. At the time of Stanley Miller. Stanley Miller makes life in the laboratory.
Well, I mean, now.
I mean, that's the way it was handled. And I thought, wait a minute, what did he produce? All he did was biochemistry. All right. That's all he did was take the right chemicals, put electricity in there. And he made these nice amino acids. Oh, the building blocks of life. Well, the popular magazines, the popular press said he made life. Nope, belongs to one amino acid. Wow. Or not a one, he might have made it several. But there are many things that in that mixture that he made, left-handed and right-handed, life only uses one. Fine. I mean, there's a whole pile of problems with that. And he had to have a trap to get it out of that system that he just manufactured it in. Otherwise, that lightning experiment and the electrical discharge would destroy the products at a rate of 1,000 times faster than what they're made. So he had to have that
The trap.
thing, the trap it's called in the experiment. But then when you look at amino acids, how far away from that is it from life? How many, let's take a simple a simple protein. We have to have 400 of them. 400 amino acids, it's not different types, but the combination of 400 beads in the string.
Arranged in
And
the right
that
way.
is the probability is so slim, as I said.
Yeah, that
in
order. Yeah.
Specific order. Exactly. And, yeah, and so, right. And they're coming apart too. It's not that they stay there and something else tries and something else, no, it's all disassembling. And so you're starting all over again.
And he also made sugars. I mean, in that experiment, there were sugars produced which would bind
Bind.
up the amino acids. So
Nothing but tar would be produced, basically.
in other words,
But not even that.
it was an interesting experiment in the lab, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the origin of life on this earth.
And lightning is not going to happen and work for that. And not only that, the hot pools, the Yellowstone National Park, the hot springs is not going to answer it as well. Okay, go ahead. I think another question from somebody else before I go back to a question for him. Go ahead.
Are you familiar with Francis Collins and his book, The Language of?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Okay.
Do you know of like his theory biologos?
Yeah.
What he describes? What is your
But-
view on that?
Could you comment on the question just for the board?
Go ahead, Mary Jo.
No, you said yes, you're
Well,
familiar with them.
the biologos, that particular organization, I think he's been part of. Is that what you're referring to, the biologos organization?
Well, not necessarily the organization, but just his idea, which is, if I understand it, more like the intelligent design plays into like kind of there's a creator and he sets the parameters of the universe that comes into being, and then it just runs.
Right.
And
That's- Okay,
And
so
so-
he's asking the question about biologos and Francis Collins' idea, as you understand it, being that he said that this creator set everything in motion and just kind of let it run. Now that's a potential possibility, isn't it?
It gets away from the probability of getting the very first thing. Okay.
So
And so,
it is a potential way of explaining things. It's consistent with a deistic view of God. And basically that God created a big machine and turned it on and let it run. But that's not the God of the Bible. That's not the God that we see being intimately involved in the lives of human beings. And it contradicts what we find in scripture as far as what the Bible says. God spoke it into existence, and it tells us he did this on the first day and this on the second day and this on the third day. So it's an idea, yes, but I believe that it's not consistent with the biblical account.
Right.
So you could say, well, it's a possibility, but then again, you're relating back to faith, to say, okay, maybe there is a God who did that, but it doesn't explain what we're seeing in the rest of scripture about a God who cares and a God who is involved in the lives of human beings.
and not only that, there are so many steps, not just the original life to let it run, but now you're going to have that particular theory is going to have to explain, how do you get an eye? How do you get any of the number of body organ systems? How do you get the skin structure, and the tremendous problems with, overcoming the obstacles of that. So many different things has to be explained. All right. And so in that case, this creator had to step in how many millions of times? Okay.
A
How
miracle
many
after
millions of
miracle.
times?
There would have to be miracle after miracle after miracle, really, because you don't, in life, you've got systems that are interdependent. So you've got to have this one dependent on this one, dependent on that one. And, a step by step kind of evolution works. And so in the long run,
You're doing anything.
I don't know. Oh, that was
Oh,
you.
that's you. Okay.
In the long run, I think it takes just as much or more faith to believe in a system like that. Then, the question is, why would we want to go that direction? I think at that point, you can go, yes, maybe it's a possibility, but again, there's lots and lots of steps along the way that would need to be embraced.
And there's so many of the evolutionary aspects
You
that
got-
Mary Jo is
you
going to be
want- have
presenting
something to
tomorrow
add
that
to
don't
that?
work, and the fossil record that doesn't work. Go ahead there, Parnell.
Yeah, and just as, this is the part one of the 4-part series, so it really gets more and more exciting as you put all the pieces together. So you can only present so much in one night, but then some of these questions and conversations are relating. I can, from my experience, know that they're going to relate to what we're going to present tomorrow night and Thursday, Friday night, and so on. So it's really exciting. So I encourage you, come again, not trying to shut it down here, but come again or check the recordings. I know they're going to talk about, the challenges with adding information, I think tomorrow night, and do the mechanisms that are proposed that how evolution works actually explain the adding of information more and more complex to get to where we are at present. And then they're going to look at the examples of evolution that are posited as, as good examples of how things work, and demonstrate how they do the opposite of what they're proposed to do. So that's going to be tomorrow night. They're looking at specific examples. So that's exciting. Friday night, we're going to talk about the flood. So we're talking about the difference between, say, an intelligent designer and, the biblical creation account. They're going to get into the details in the next couple nights, filling in these gaps of what the Bible record says and how we see the evidence in the world. So pretty exciting.
That's fun. And I promised your question
Yeah,
would be
it-
answered.
it's a great question. I think that, when did the more atheistic thing get into Darwinism? Because originally, when he started out with Darwin, I mean, he died as a deacon in the Anglican Church. He's buried, they have him, I've seen his plaque inside of Westminster Abbey, and if he was an outright atheist, he would not been buried in sacred ground. Especially in the 19th century, he would be nowhere. Look, you gotta go somewhere else. Somewhere else, but he's not going to here. And I noticed that originally his idea was more along the lines of, I think I discovered how God might have, one of the ways that God might have created things, but he never separated from the idea of creator. That was something he did not originally do. I was kind of wondering, when did this sort of got hijacked?
Go ahead, Mary Jo.
I think what happened.
Repeat some of
Oh,
that.
yeah, when did Darwin, what the comment was that Darwin was buried in the Episcopal Church, did you say?
Yeah, he's
And Anglican.
In the Anglican Church,
Yeah.
yeah, and that he never had really rejected faith entirely. I don't know about that, whether he rejected faith entirely, but I mean, his book, really, Darwin's book really was based on the idea of natural selection and showed an awful lot of what we know about artificial selection. Mankind can breed all kinds of varieties of creatures from, starting with an original type of, like the Galapagos finches and so on. We'll look at those tomorrow. But those variations we would look at as variations within a created kind. I think what happened was the philosophers of the day and many people in Darwin's time were looking for some sort of justification within the scientific realm to justify their idea that there was no God. They wanted to get rid of God, basically. And they looked at Darwin's theory and they said, here's the justification in natural science that we need. And then they extrapolated far beyond what Darwin's original book actually stated.
Yeah, because he doesn't state in his book that there was no creator. Now, I think he was deacon in the Anglican Church, I don't think,
Okay.
I don't see him being rabble-roused atheist sort of.
I've often wondered if Darwin would have had the understanding of Mendel's work, which came out shortly after his work did. I wonder sometimes if he would have, if if he personally would have embraced the evolutionary ideas, because so much of what Darwin was trying to answer are explained based on just simple Mendelian genetics, you know, and what we know today about how genetics work. So I don't know where Darwin would, you know, I don't know whether he would have continued on in that vein or not. But it's interesting. Darwin, by the way, did not originate the idea of natural selection and evolution. That he said he learned it out of his grandfather's knees, and his grandfather was a believer in evolution and natural selection, coming up as an explanatory theory, at least an explanatory idea for how we could get the variety in living things. And so
Darwin popularized it.
he popularized it. And there were actually creationists at the time who were already talking about natural selection, which simply at that point was looked at as a conservative mechanism to weed out those misfits that couldn't survive in an environment. And Darwin took the ideas of artificial selection, mankind's breeding of various types and so on, and then he extended it. He showed, we'll show you tomorrow too, a tree of life that he jotted down in his journal. He said, I think, and he just projected back to see, you know, how all these things could be related way back in time. But he didn't have the evidence of that at all.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's clear when we are talking about this that we're talking philosophy. How come the academics is so like put as science?
That's a good question. He's asking, he says it's clear that this topic really, we're talking about philosophy, so how come it's been put into sciences so much? And I think it's that the philosophers of the day, way back in Darwin's time, were looking for a scientific explanation to support their belief, because they were looking for ways to say there is no God. And Darwin's theory seemed to support that idea that there is no God, that everything could come about by natural selection and chance and accidents, so on. And so, and that's just been duplicated over and over and over again, where people think evolution is science. But when you really look at it, it isn't. Now, there are certain aspects of it that we can check out scientifically, but then there's a whole lot of philosophy or faith involved.
Earlier, you were using fossils as part of that, more so to show that there isn't adaptive evolutionary qualities in animals, and really will show the animals. Like I said, still today,
Like trilobites, you mean?
Yeah.
exact same. Is that to show more that there isn't any adaptive qualities in creation?
Not necessarily.
To argue more that there isn't like the earth isn't as old as
Okay. Right. There's, yeah, he has a question about fossils and the fossil evidence, and what I think the only real fossil evidence you showed was a trilobite tonight, right? Did you get into fossils?
I didn't. I
Just
just
the eye of
mentioned
the
something about
trilobite.
the fossil record being part of tomorrow night's lecture.
Tomorrow night, we'll
I
get
don't,
into the
did I
fossil
show any
record.
fossils? Oh, I mentioned the ancient arthropod
Yeah,
that had a brain scan that was identical to the arthropod today. It was not a trilobite, okay?
so
That was
tomorrow,
not what it was. So
tomorrow night, Dave will deal a little more with fossils, and the predictions by the evolution model would be that we should see things moving from simple to complex. If it's going to support the idea of evolution that we normally see today, we should see transitions between one kind of thing and another kind of thing. And we should see those evidence of those transitions. Tomorrow night, he'll deal with that a little more.
Yeah.
On
but
fossils.
that's just part of a longer lecture tomorrow night. You know, she'll do a good share of that.
And what the the punchline. I'll give you the punchline.
Oh, no.
You can come tomorrow and look for the evidence for it. But the creation model would say things were created already complex, that complexity didn't have to evolve to get to a certain point, that they were created with complexity and functionality already there, and that things were created according to basic types or basic kinds of animals. So one kind of thing didn't turn into another kind of thing. So that whole tree of life that we see, we don't see the evidence in the fossil record or in the living world of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And then we're also seeing not nearly so much evidence of change as would be predicted by the evolution model. We'll show you evidence both of fossils and of living creatures that very, very minor, if any, changes over supposed millions and millions of years. And if evolution was true, we should see a lot more change really than we do see, just based on calculated mutational rates that we can see today. And so we'll look at fossils tomorrow night in more depth.
Okay.
We were talking about level of intelligence. Speak up a little.
He says he works in robotics as an engineer there.
Beginning of the year, I saw a video that Boston Dynamics put out, dancing robots. And
Yeah, I saw that.
it's fascinating, right? When you see these dancing robots and to think that no intelligence was required to make those robots move in that way is foolish.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about the level of complexity there, you would not argue that intelligence is not possible. Programmers and the functional system built. In the same way, when you look at the human body, with these robots were even modeled after
Yeah.
functionality.
Those copycats.
And I think that's an interesting perspective there to consider that no intelligence could produce the living world that we know.
Okay, so he's an engineer. He's an engineer making a comment about the complexity of things that we humans have been able to create, things like robotics. And as you look at robotics, you know that those things didn't happen by accident without any human input, right? They had intelligent input. And so we can look at a robot, and yet that robot is modeled after a human being. And humans are much more complex than the robots are. And so, just that argument that it's things that humans can create that are complex, and yet we know that they take human intelligence and input to create those things. And so why would we think that our bodies, our minds, our very life could come from accident when we know it takes intelligence and design? I oftentimes wonder how any engineer can believe in evolution, because your whole career is based on design and working hard to get things to work together, right? And designing things that will work. And so you know that it doesn't happen just by accidents and chance, and the properties of molecules just coming together in particular ways.
Thanks
Was
for the
that
comment.
halfway accurate from what you said?
I just want to comment on that. The Bible says this, it says, the wrath of God in Romans 1:18 is revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God has made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it says that God says that we can see his eternal power and divine nature from the things that have been made. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that there's an evidence of design in everything that points to an intelligent, all-powerful, eternal, personal creator. So just the Bible speaks of these things.
That's why we have the preacher on hand.
You got the
right?
preacher here. Preacher, bro. No.
It's true, though. You know,
Yeah,
as we look
exactly.
at the world around us, it's meant to point us to the creator. Yeah.
So are you guys, what's your position with like natural selection or evolution being within creatures, but not necessarily the source of creation? Just thinking in relation to the Bible would argue that there is an evolutionary power within humans. The fact that all of human diversity we see today, the Bible says, came from Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
So there must be changing attributes to humans in other creation smoothly as well. Just from a biblical perspective,
Right.
that we have such diversity from humans. So I guess just like how do you guys relate with that sort of evolution? Maybe it's not evolution,
Right.
that kind of adaptability that's in creation. How do you guys relate with that?
Okay, so the question is about how, as a creationist who believes the Bible, would we look at adaptability of creatures to the environment and also the changes over time that we see. We believe, according to Scripture, that there were only 2 human beings in the beginning. We see a lot of diversity in life today, and yes, there's a lot of diversity. We believe, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow also, but there's a lot of diversity that is originally built into the genetic systems of those originally created animals, plants, humans, okay? And I will show you some examples of that tomorrow. But also the processes of mutation and natural selection work. The question is, do they produce new things, better things? Can they ever explain the origin of the information to get from molecules all the way up to human beings? Or what are we seeing with mutations in natural selection? We believe that they happen, yes, and mutations generally have a downward effect. Generally, they have a deleterious effect and not a beneficial one. And we'll talk about that. But when we look at it, natural selection works. I mean, somewhat. Sometimes it's survival of the fittest. Sometimes it's survival of the luckiest.
That's what Stephen Jay Gould said.
I mean, if you're an elk and you're out on the side of a mountain in Colorado and a landslide comes through, it doesn't matter how fast you are, you know, whether you're fit or not fit, you could get taken out by a landslide because you can't go that fast. And so sometimes it's survival of the luckiest, it seems like. And yet we know that there are certain aberrations that come about through mutations, genetic mutations, that just the offspring is not viable. They won't survive. So we don't deny the processes of mutation and natural selection. It's just what can they produce, and what will they actually do in the long run. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. I hope you can come. Otherwise, get a
That's
hold
a
of
very
the.
important aspect too.
Yeah, it's very important. And part of that is how much variability is possible within the originally created beings. Anybody else? Question?
Genesis chapter 1 actually does talk about kinds. And it says that
Genesis chapter 1 says that if you read it, it talks, I think it uses the word kinds like 10 times.
Yeah.
And so it says that these different animals, plants, birds, fish, creeping things, human beings would reproduce each according to its kind. So the Bible gives us these frameworks, says there's these kinds, whatever a kind is. So it's interesting. That's kind of what you guys are saying. Within a kind, there's a lot of genetic diversity. There's a lot of what we believe is genes already present that gives the ability for a lot of adaptation, a lot of expression to survive on this planet, to be resilient. So we would probably say the diversity in the human race is probably vastly, the majority of the diversity, or in any kind of organism, is vastly credited to the genetics already present. The variability already present within the genome of each kind gives rise to the attributes that we see today, rather than the results of mutation.
Just look around you in the world today and look at the various countries and the various features of the people you see in those countries. You'll find out there's not much difference. Okay, there's not much difference, period, in the humankind. And that's the exciting part about it. Yeah, there are different features, but Mary Jo's going to show you tomorrow night how you get all those well, let's say take one of those features, main features. She'll show how that happens in one generation.
We're also going to
Very
look
easily.
just a little bit at epigenetics, which is chemical tags, you might say, that are on the DNA molecule, which help to understand which pieces are expressed and which ones aren't expressed. And that epigenetics is fairly recent, in the last, 10 years or so, I guess, started hearing about it. But it explains some things that I always was questioning was, well, okay, we've got the DNA and it's very complex, but how does it interact with the environment? You know, how does that relate to changes that we see in the environment? Because we see things that are able to change and adapt to new environments. And I think epigenetics is a way to explain a lot of that, but I don't see that as a random process either. I see that as God designing it in to give the organisms an ability to survive, because the God of the Bible is always concerned with life, you know, and he created things to survive. And it says that he gave the commandment to the animals and later to humans to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Well, if you're going to be fruitful and fill the earth, you have to be able to have some ability to change and adapt, right, to new environments. And again, if you could create your robot that he was talking about to be able to adapt to new environments, and I think maybe intelligent human beings might someday be able to do that, to adapt to different environments. That's pretty amazing, you know, to be able to do that, though. Yeah. And it requires, again, intelligence. So we'll try to deal with that a little more too.
A built-in mechanism within that DNA to be able to change the code in order for this to happen.
Or change what's
this is
expressed.
an amazing computer program.
Not to change the DNA itself, but to change the code, parts of the code that are expressed, or the way they're expressed, or the time they're expressed, and so on. And I think that's one of the fascinating things to me about genetics that is coming out now with more and more research. I mean, I remember back in high school when I learned about the 4-letter code and how it would produce, you know, using the DNA, how you could code for different proteins and produce different proteins and so on. And I thought it was fantastically complex back then. It took me a long time to even understand that. But now we know that's just a piece of the puzzle, because now we have to have these things folded in certain ways, and so much complexity.
Just because it looks complex, does that make it creative?
That's not what, well, we're not talking
We're
about
not
just
talking about
looking
that.
complexity. We're talking about
type.
specified kind of complexity. The complex interrelationships of parts where you couldn't just evolve one piece and then years later evolve something else. We wouldn't even be here, you know, if we didn't have that complexity of embryology and so on.
If there's no other questions that we want to ask speakers as a group, you're welcome to hang out. We can just shut down the group format and just move to just hanging out if you want to talk further one-on-one. Any other questions right now? Okay, I want to thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave and Mary Jo, for speaking tonight. And hope to see you all again.
See you tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Waking myself up. So I'm like,
I feel like it's.
Model complex biological. So I think where you're trying to go is that if we can model it just simple. Right. One can say.
I have a really good answer. By far now.
Yeah, you gotta have that out there.
Very good.
I know what it's. You guys recognize it? Oh, that's great. I got that at the parade. Isn't that madness?